This is Join Us in France, episode 363. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and Join Us in France is the podcast where we talk about France. Great places to visit in France, French culture, history, gastronomy, and news related to travel during the pandemic. Today, I bring you a conversation with Elyse Rivin about Lafayette, the Hermione, and the Arsenal of Rochefort. What better topic to celebrate French-American friendship? It's a complex story, and Elyse explains it wonderfully well. For the French expression of the week, should you say "Je vous souhaite une bonne journée" or "Je vous souhaite une belle journée"? After the interview, I'll update you on the new way to get your health pass if you're visiting France soon. And if you like what we do here at Join Us in France, consider supporting us by visiting joinusinfrance.com/boutique to check out my cookbook, Join Us at the Table. There are some great French recipes you can add to your American Thanksgiving in my cookbook. My Paris tours on the Voice Map app. And by the way, podcast listeners get a discount if they buy from the boutique instead of buying from the app. But if you listen to this episode as soon as it gets published, be aware that the itinerary review service is going to be on vacation between November 15th and November 26th because I need a break. The podcast will continue to be published every Sunday, 6 p.m. Paris time as always. Follow Addicted to France on Instagram to see the photos of the gorgeous Hermione ship. I will post them this week. And the best way to stay in touch with me and with the podcast is to sign up for the free newsletter at joinusinfrance.com/newsletter. Bonjour Elyse.
Bonjour Annie.
Today we're talking about the Hermione.
The Hermione. What's the Hermione? Oh my goodness.
And the Marquis de La Fayette.
And the Marquis
Dun, dun, dun,
de
dun.
La Fayette. I have a very, very, very good book. It's in French. I don't know. I'm sure there must be the equivalent in English. I bought it actually as a gift for my husband, but it's a highly rated biography of Lafayette, which I think I should probably actually read from cover to cover.
You might.
But in the process of preparing for this, I actually did some reading about him, and he was quite an interesting fellow.
Sure.
He really was.
Sure was.
And so we're going to talk about a ship, a frigate, called the Hermione, which for those of you out there are like me who find this difficult, it's actually pronounced in French the Hermione. And the first couple of times I heard somebody say that, I went, what? What are you talking about? I looked at the word, and then when they showed me the word, I went, oh, you mean the Hermione? And they thought I was weird. So there you are. The difference between pronouncing in English and pronouncing in French.
Yeah, it's not that different. Hermione.
Kind of, yeah. Anyway.
Everybody's familiar with the name now because of Hermione Granger.
That's true.
Of Harry Potter.
Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Harry Potter. Yes, it's a very British name. You would not find most Americans naming their child that.
Maybe not. It's true. I don't think I had ever met an American.
No, I don't think so.
No.
No, I don't think so.
Or a French person, to tell you the truth.
No, and in fact, what I don't know, I have no idea where the name comes from, to be honest, because it isn't a first name that is particularly used in French.
Yeah, but we have a ton of names that we haven't used in decades, hundreds of years, some of them.
Yeah, which brings up a question which, of course, is really kind of tangential, but it's the question of how do ships get named? I have no idea. I have no idea. But anyway.
Some of them, it's pretty obvious. When you walk by the docks, it's like Jack's favorite, or
right,
you know,
right. But we're
my treasure.
We're not talking about little private things. We're talking about
A big thing.
royal ships.
Yes, a big thing.
Royal. Okay, royal. Anyway.
And this big ship is stationed some of the time, most of the time.
Most of the time. Its permanent home
Is in Rochefort.
in Rochefort. It's actually in what's called the Arsenal of Rochefort. Rochefort is a lovely small city on the coast, the Atlantic coast, at the what is called the embouchure. That is actually where the Charente River empties into the Atlantic Ocean. And it's 35 miles south of La Rochelle. And it's 40 kilometers north of a very beautiful resort beach town called Royan. And it's not that far either from Sainte. So it's all of these things are in the Charente area. And this is a place that is a wonderful, wonderful half-day visit. It could be a full-day visit if you want to see everything that there is to visit, including there's a museum of the Marine, of the Navy. And the town of Rochefort is quite lovely. It's similar in style to La Rochelle. It's all made out of white limestone in a very, very regular pattern because it was built specifically. There was just a small village there until the 1660s. And then under Louis XIV, his finance minister, Colbert, who was very, very important in the history of lots of things that were built, managed to bring together enough money because Louis XIV wanted to create a new shipbuilding port that would be the best, most modern for its time, and would rival the shipbuilding ports of their arch enemy, the English. And they chose this site. And what they did was they built the town of Rochefort from scratch.
Okay.
In 1666.
Okay.
And
Interesting.
so it's very, very beautiful, classical, the old part. It's very beautiful classical style architecture. The streets are pretty much on a grid system, pretty straight and lined up. And they took the right bank of the Charente River as it leads out into the Atlantic Ocean, and they built what is called the Arsenal, which is this major shipbuilding zone right there, and it is still there. And what you have there now is three things. You have a part of the buildings that date from that epoch, but of course have been renovated. That is the Museum of the Marine or the Navy, which is very interesting. And then you have a part that's called the Cordellerie, the Corderie, which is another small museum that's devoted to talking about how they made all of the cord
ropes,
the cords, which, some of these, when you see them on the ship, they're as big as your hand. I mean, they're amazing to even look at.
Right.
And then you have...
And they're cotton ropes.
They're chanvre, which is it's basically the fiber of the same plant that produces marijuana.
Yeah, hemp.
And sisal, I think it's called sisal.
Okay.
It's another vegetal fiber that's very, very, very strong. And then they built this part that is actually what is called the Arsenal, which is strange because I always thought of the Arsenal as being a place where you store arms.
Right. That's the common name.
It's a common use of the term, right?
Yeah.
But in this case, it's really for building warships.
Okay.
And that was its real function. And so they created what they call in French a radeau, which is a kind of basin, relatively shallow, protected on three sides. And that is where they actually do the construction of the ship. And so when you go there, when you go to visit, that is where the ship is.
Mm-hmm. Most of the time.
Well, it's when it's there.
Right.
When it's there, this is its home, basically. And when it's not out on a voyage, but the voyages are not every year because this is a ship that was built entirely by an association. It does not belong to the government. It belongs
private.
It's private in the sense that it belongs to this nonprofit organization, and the money that was used for the building of it or the rebuilding of it, because it's a replica of the original, is mostly private funds with some money from the government.
Yeah,
they would given to it, and a lot of the money of the entrance fees is used for the upkeep of the ship. So I went there this summer with my husband. It's the second time we've gone, and because we were coming down in that area. Actually, the first time we was coming down, the second time it was going up, but it doesn't make any difference. We were in that region, and we both really enjoyed the visit the first time, so we decided it would be fun to go back. And I must say that this second visit was even more fun than the first one. And this is a visit you can do with children, except for maybe teeny little ones, because if you want to go into the ship, you go through the museum, and I'll talk a little bit about what you see in the museum, but then you go up the planks, it's actually stairs now, and you go into the ship and you visit pretty much everything that there is in the ship. And they have young volunteers who are there as guides, and you can ask just about any technical question you want, because the young people who work there are people who have also taken the trip. They've also taken one of the voyages. The entire basic crew, except for the officers that go off into the seas, is all volunteer young people who want to have that experience.
Sure.
And aren't necessarily sailors in their other part of their lives.
Right.
But they have such a passion for this. So you can ask them about any of the questions about the history of it, about the building of it, about the materials about it. And you can pretty much go everywhere you want inside the ship. So it's really fun. And there's a huge area that includes this museum that when you go into the museum, basically what happens is you have one of two options. You can just pay to go visit the Hermione, which means you take this trajectory that goes through museum about the ship. And you don't have to stop if you don't want to. A lot of it is the history of the original ship, and then the history of this replica, and it's 3 voyages that it's taken so far, with lots of photos and maps and everything. And then it takes you into the workshops where you see the people still building pieces, making the cord, using tar to seal off things. There's a forgeron, they're hammering away. So you see all of the activity that goes into the making of the pieces of a ship like this, and then you go up the steps and into the ship. But you can, if the museum doesn't interest you that much, you can go walk right through it or walk around it and just go up into the ship and then visit the ship and stay as long as you want. And then when you go out the other side, and there's a park. And there's, of course, a gift shop, which is kind of neat because it has nice books and then T-shirts and things like that. But the books are very interesting. And then it's a very big park space, and there's picnic grounds and things like that. And so it's very convivial.
Sounds good.
It's really a nice, and of course, Rochefort is part of the Atlantic coast where it's sunny most of the year. So it's a lovely thing to do. We had a great time. We got there. I think we got there right after breakfast, and we stayed for probably about 3 hours or so. I mean, we took our time, and we stopped, and right nearby are lots of little cafes and restaurants and places like that. So if you're staying in La Rochelle or in a place nearby, you can come and do as much of the day as you want there. In fact, we were there on a day when there was an open-air market, which meant that it was even more fun because we could do something else at the same time.
Yeah.
Get your ice cream, get your, coffee, get your whatever it is, you want. So it's a really nice thing to do. And my guess is that a lot of people don't know about it. Everybody knows about La Rochelle, I think, now. But I thought it would be fun to talk about this because it's really a great visit to do. And it is a good family visit as well. So let's talk about the history of this wonderful, very beautiful ship, by the way. It's very beautiful. You'll see how much color there is in it. The Hermione was one of a class of ship called Concords. This was the name that was given to them well before the airplane. They were designed as warships. And what's really interesting, according to what I've been reading, is that they were really built to help fight the British. I mean, this was it was like both France and England had lots of colonies by this part of the 17th century, But the English and the French, the French, they had one obsession. It was like beating the English to whatever territories were out there in the world. And so because
the Caribbean.
There's the Caribbean, right?
Right.
Which was really getting divided up pretty much between the two of them.
Yeah.
And by this time, of course, the English had established a lot of their colonies in what became the United States. And the French had sent out groups of hunters and traders, and they had established a few bases up in what is now Canada, and then a few further south along the Gulf of Mexico. But I'm interjecting this because this is just my interpretation. My guess is they were just feeling a little jealous, there was a lot going on. And so besides which, seriously, Louis XIV wanted to make the French Navy as powerful as the English Navy. And so this is really the motivation to start building these ships, which for the time were the latest thing in warships.
Right, and they have a lot of cannons on the side.
Oh, yes, they do. They have a lot of cannons. And let me tell you, if you ever saw a pirate movie, think of all the pirate movies you've seen. When you come up close to it, it is really impressive. It's impressive from being inside on the deck. And then when you go down into the hold, which is where the cannons are with, the openings. But it's even more impressive on the outside, I have to say, when you're standing on the dock looking at this ship, it's 65 meters long.
Well, that's big. Yeah,
it's big.
That's a big ship.
It's got 3 masts. I have some statistics that I'll read off in a minute or two, but it's a big ship, especially for its time. And you have these big black cannons sticking out these holes, sort of staring at you. And
it's the kind of cannons that they could retract and close the trap.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, in fact, one of the guides, one of the things that I retained, because a lot of the technical stuff, I have to admit, was not really what I really was paying attention to. But one of the guides that was talking about the cannons was explaining that they would never, ever shoot off 2 cannons next to one another, and they would alternate from one side to the other. In other words, the original Hermione had 26 huge cannons and 6 small ones. Okay, the replica has a total of 22 cannons.
Okay.
But which is really interesting is that in the replica, they were not allowed to make the cannons functional. In other words, they're actually not completely open. You could put a cannonball in the cannon, but it won't go anywhere. I mean,
it's not a real cannon.
It's not a real cannon, and the reason why is because if they had made the cannons functional, the ship would be considered to be a military ship.
Sure.
And would be under the regulations of the French Navy, and therefore they did not want to have that happen.
Right.
So basically,
defeats the purpose.
So in spite of all of the conversation about how powerful these cannons are and everything else, they don't function at all.
They're not made.
They're not made to function anymore. But the cannons themselves are exactly the same size, exactly the same shape, built in exactly the same way, as are the cannonballs, which, believe me, you cannot even lift if you wanted
huge.
to. They're really amazing. And yes, they when they fire them, they go forward and then they go back. They're like on a sliding ramp.
Yeah. Rails. They're on rails.
They're on rails. And they can't have everything firing at the same time on the same side, because then the ship would just tip over.
Right.
So you have to be careful. So the Hermione was one of several of these ships that was actually built. It was not built in 1660s. It was built in 1775 and 1776. So this is basically 100 years later. By this time, the town of Rochefort is very important as the biggest military naval shipbuilding place in all of France. Mm-hmm. And it's very wealthy because the king has put a lot of money into the town of Rochefort and into this famous arsenal. And so this was the second or third of these ships that was actually built. And it had already made one voyage. I'm not sure to where, because it doesn't say specifically where the maiden voyage had taken it. But it was finished by 1777. And then this is what happened. This is why it has gone down in history. In the year of 1777, there was a young man. He was 20 years old at the time, and he was the Marquis de La Fayette. His full name was Gilbert de Motier. Hi, Gilbert. Gilbert de Motier, the Marquis de La Fayette. At the time, his name was La, and then a separate word, Fayette. It was much later in his life that he actually put them together and made them into one word. And he was from a long, long line of noble men who had been in the Marine, in the Navy. And he was apparently very brilliant, but also for more surprising for the time that he lived, he and his father, the still living real Marquis at that time, he hadn't yet completely inherited the title and all of the things that go with it, because he was the family was very wealthy. They were very, very liberal in the American sense of the term. That is, they had read all of the 18th century literature about independence, about the monarchy being a bad thing, about slavery being bad, and that was the politics of this particular family. And so this young man...
So they were noble, but...
They were noble,
aspired to the... To more of a republic.
That's he personally. This young Marquis. He personally was fascinated by what he had been hearing about and learning about in terms of what was going on in what they called the colonies. That is, the British colonies. He had met Benjamin Franklin, who, of course, had spent a lot of time in Paris,
right?
And he spoke a little bit of English, and so. At the age of 20, he was made captain of this ship, the Hermione.
Wow.
And he set off with a crew. Now, listen to this, because we're talking about a ship. I mean, I was on this ship, and I walked through everything that was visible. There's apparently a second hold down below that we were not allowed in. At the time, there were 255 men on this ship. Let me tell you that today, when they take this ship out into sea, there are 80 people, and I can't even imagine where the 80 people stay. So what it could have been like with 250, and these were not slaves or anything like that.
They were just packed.
This is packed
soldiers,
sailors who were all of them sleeping on hammocks and on the floor and whatever it is, they do. But anyway, so the Marquis de Lafayette set out with this ship with arms to give to the colonialists who were fighting against the British during this war for independence. And he went directly with letters in his hand to George Washington. In fact, he became the adopted son of George Washington.
Really?
He wrote in his memoirs that he considered him like his second father.
Oh, okay.
I mean, in that sense, that he spent 6 years. He was with George Washington for 6 years. He helped him in the fighting, in the strategic battles. He was responsible for the Battle of Yorktown being won by the colonialists, the people that were called the insurgents at the time, against the British. And he would write back to France, and he was so enamored of the ideas that were coming out of the French American War of Independence. That by this time, of course, he spoke absolutely fluent English. Anyway, so he was there from 1777 till 1783, and then he went back to France and got himself involved in politics. And he was lucky because he was for the revolution, but he was not for the extreme terror part of the revolution. He was for a republic, basically on the order of what was going on in England, except even though the English were certainly not his friends, the idea of a constitutional country with a monarchy, whatever,
Right, so keep the monarch as a figurehead, but
right, exactly.
No power.
But he was against slavery and was very vocal in his attitude to be against slavery. He was for a republic. He was for the French Revolution. He stayed an adamant partisan of the French Revolution until it reached what they call the period of the Terror. At which point, the irony is, of course, is that he had to flee France because he was a nobleman. So that even though he decided to renounce all of his privileges because he was born a nobleman, he was considered to be the enemy. So in 1792, he fled France, and he was in exile for for a long time. He was in exile actually until 1804.
Where did he go?
Well, first, I don't know where he went, but what happened, strangely enough, is that he wound up being put in prison in Austria. And the reason he was put in prison is because he was a nobleman who refused to renounce his adherence to the French Revolution. And so Lafayette, in spite of the fact that he was definitely for the revolution and had been an active member of the Revolutionary Committee, he was forced to flee France because he was a marquis. And I don't know where he went. I think he went to the Netherlands at first. But what happened was, strangely enough, that he was taken prisoner and spent 5 years in a prison in Austria. And the reason why is that the Habsburgs and the whoever, I can't remember which emperor it was at that time in Austria, they all, of course, because of Marie Antoinette, they wanted to help the French king because they were terrified that if this went through, that, of course, the same thing would happen on all these
in
other
countries. Yeah, which all had royalties as well.
Which all had royalty as well. Yeah. And so, but interestingly enough, the reason they put him in prison is because they were afraid that he would foment a group of revolutionaries in Austria. Because,
I see.
Because even though he was a marquis, they
knew where his heart was.
They knew where his heart was, and they knew what he was trying to do. So he did not go back to France until 1804. I don't know when he had his children, because by that time he had several sons, and he lived until 1834. So he became a politician, basically, and he was against Napoleon. It's very interesting. He was against Napoleon, and certainly at the moment when Napoleon reinstated slavery, he was horrified. He at first adhered to the idea of a restoration of a king if the king didn't have anything to do, and basically was a constitutional monarch. But basically at the end was disillusioned by all of this stuff, and then he lived to be a man in his 70s and died in 1834. But he has forever and ever and ever become associated with the American Revolution.
Of course, yes.
And he was a great proponent of all the ideas of Washington and Jefferson and all of the writings that were done in the United States. So in the collective memory, the ship, the Hermione, has forever been associated with him. And so what happens is very interesting. The ship was used until 1793, at which point, for some reason, it ran aground in the Loire River, the estuary, and then was, I don't know if it was destroyed at first, but basically was retired. Okay, so its career as a warship did not last all that long.
Right,
it really didn't. But there were everyone knew what it had looked like. Everyone knew what its dimensions were. There were drawings of it. Yeah. There were papers of it and everything.
Plans, probably.
Plans of all kinds. And so in the 1990s, 200 years later, basically the anniversary of its retirement, if you could call it that, there was an association created by a bunch of intellectuals in France, headed by a man who's actually well known, who's considered to be a philosopher, and I know him as a writer, even though I have not read anything by him. A man named Eric Orsena, who created an association called the Lafayette Hermione Association, and they decided that in the spirit of all of these free liberal thinkers of the 18th century, and in honor of Lafayette, that they wanted to rebuild the ship exactly the way it had looked at the time it was in function. And so they took on this job, which meant collecting a lot of money.
Right.
Because they pledged, in a sense, to redo it so that at least from the point of its operational facilities and what it looked like, it would be exactly the same ship. And it took them quite a number of years to get together all the money for it. And so they started this in 1992. And basically the ship was more or less finished by 2012.
Wow.
So that's 20 years.
Yeah, that's a long time.
It's a long time.
To work on a ship. Yeah.
And it took its maiden voyage, the new Hermione, in 2014. And that was a voyage that just took it a bit out into the Atlantic Ocean to some of the islands and then came back. And then, unfortunately, I was here because I remember my sister telling me how wonderful it was. In 2015, the Hermione, with the crew of 80, mostly volunteers, but with a few, of course, professional naval people, set off to reproduce the voyage of Lafayette. And they went across the Atlantic Ocean, and they landed first in Yorktown in Virginia, and went all the way up the coast. They hit every single place that Lafayette had been to. You can imagine they went to Baltimore, they went to Philadelphia. When they got to New York, there was a huge celebration with fireworks and all kinds of things. And I can just imagine what it must have been like to see this absolutely gorgeous, very colorful, three-masted ship coming into the harbor of New York. Apparently, there were thousands and thousands of people out to see it and celebrate.
Of course, of course.
It just must have been a really wonderful, cool thing to do.
Yeah.
And then it went up to Boston, then all the way up to a French island called Saint-Pierre, which nobody knows about because
Saint-Pierre-Miquelon.
Miquelon. I mean, you don't know where it is, and you wouldn't even care to know where it is because it's got no trees and it's freezing cold there all the time. But anyway,
I know where it is.
I know where it is too. It's off of Newfoundland. But,
Yeah.
it's French. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not Canadian.
Yeah.
And then it went back to France, and so that was its great reproduction of the Lafayette voyage in 2015. And then it did another trip back to the Antilles, to the Caribbean, in 2018. And was supposed to take a trip, go on a voyage, I guess is more correct to say, in 2020, which of course was halted by the COVID. So apparently that's going to happen in the next 6 months. I'm not sure exactly when. Mm-hmm. And this time it's going to go north into the Baltic and the North Sea and things like that. I'm not, because apparently there are a couple of other countries that have reproduced ships. I think what I was reading was that Sweden did, or a couple of these other countries. It was kind of like, it's like how you take Opie and you sometimes go and meet another person who has a nice dog. So this is the Hermione is going to go up where he's going to go say hi to another nice ship from about the same time, and they're going to wave to each other and all of that.
That's what they do, yeah.
And that's what they do, I'm not sure. I mean, but I have to say, the ship is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, and I'm not somebody who's really interested in military history at all, and I'm not necessarily a sailor of any kind. But I remember even seeing it the first time, which is about, I think, 3 or 4 years ago, and I was just blown away at how beautiful this ship is. The outside is painted in beautiful colors. It's very colorful. It's surprising, and it's really it's quite amazing. It coming up close to it, between the size of it, the three masts with the sails and the cannons and everything, and you think, my goodness, what was it like when, and they had these flotillas of 20 or so of these warships, and they were fighting each other with these cannons blasting away. It must have been quite something. I would like to just give you some of the statistical information of it, because it's really it's the kind of stuff that you think, no, you can't possibly be talking about this. To talk about what the difference is between the old and the new, okay? So we mentioned the fact that, of course, in this one, the cannons are not functioning, which, of course, is interesting because I read about this, but the guide on the ship does not tell you that. So I think that's really interesting. It's like they want to impress you with how scary these cannons are. So nobody says to you, well, in the end, we can't use these. It's like a fake decor from theater or something like that. So the ship is 65 meters long. The tallest mast is 54 meters high. They used I'm talking about the new one now. I mean, I have no idea.
Yeah.
These are the exact measures of the old one as well. But in terms of the material used to make the hull of the ship, they cut down and used 2,000 French oak trees. So the hull is entirely made of oak. which is the best, hardest, and the longest wearing wood possibly for anything like that. There are 2,100 meters square of sail.
Wow. It's a big sail.
Big. Mostly made of linen, some silk. There are 400,000 pieces of wood and metal.
That's going to make it a very heavy sail. Because linen like this...
It's thick.
I have a linen, comforter cover.
Yeah.
It is so heavy. It is much heavier than cotton.
Oh, yes, it's much heavier than cotton. Yeah. It's much heavier.
So those sails must be really heavy.
Oh, yeah. I don't think you want one of them falling on you. I really don't.
Probably not.
Not even a piece of it. Not even a piece of it. Yeah. It has 1,000 pulleys.
Yeah. Normal.
When you look
at the photos, it looks like there's ropes everywhere.
Everywhere.
Like, well, how do you know what goes where?
Oh, well, that's what you do when you're a sailor. Yeah. That's what you do. In fact, you can see the little, I don't know what you call them, the little pieces that stick out of the mast so that they can shimmy up the mast going all the way up to the bird's nest, which is the thing that's all the way up on the top. And one of the things that one of the guides was talking about was how they make the cord, and they use a lot of tar to at certain points. You can touch them, but it's you have to be careful because they actually use it in certain places. I don't remember if it's where the cord goes into something metallic so that it doesn't rust or something like that. But some of the cord is as thick as your hand, and not all of it is covered with tar.
When you say
some of it is.
I don't think it's called a cord in English.
Oh, yes, it is. Oh, yeah.
It's rope.
It's rope, but cord is really the correct term for this on a ship.
Is it?
Yeah. Yeah. It's
because to me, a cord is like a musical thing.
Oh, no. Oh, you're thinking of CHORD. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, so this is CORD even in English.
Yeah, even in English.
I see.
Yeah.
No E at the end.
No.
Because in French you would have CORDE.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
no, and it's multiple levels of twine, wrapped together. It's amazingly thick, and you wouldn't want one of those falling on you either. You really wouldn't. So it's interesting because it says that one of the differences is that the masts, which of course are enormous, they have been glued into the bases, which they weren't before. I'm surprised that it says that they used to be bolted in, but in the old way that they made furniture, with pieces of like wooden nails kind of thing. Yeah. Apparently, they think that gluing is more stable. That surprises me, but...
Yeah, they glue all sorts of things in when they work with wood. It's,
right.
Yeah.
So it must be a very, normal. Very, very strong glue in any event.
Yeah, it's made for that, yeah.
So, of course, they reduced... There are 2 anchors instead of 6. Why the original ship had 6 anchors, I have no idea. But there are only 2 now, and each one weighs 1,500 kilos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My goodness gracious. And they go down, one goes 190 meters down, so they have to be in deep waters, and the other 165 meters down. So they're really designed to be in deep water. And again, there are only 22 cannons, fake ones, but 22 instead of 26 plus 6, which were on the original. And that goes for basically comparing things in relation to what they were before. However, this is the 21st century. And in spite of the fact that the outside looks exactly like the original, there are differences. There is a motor that is used to get it in and out of its
the port.
And when it gets into shallow water, they actually use the motor. There is electricity inside, so that there are lights, and there is a refrigerator system, because when they go, the 2015 trip, they left in the middle of April and came back 5 months later in the middle of September.
It has to be a functioning ship.
So it's a functioning ship in terms, it has all of the most modern, GPS, radar kinds of things.
Right.
But when you go down and look at it, the woodwork is gorgeous. It's just like the original woodwork. The captain has, this is a ship. Everything's very small and compact, but everything's made of this gorgeous oak wood, beautifully polished. Everything is done with the finest attention to detail. So you see there are benches that are used for storage, and some of the crew sleep on those. That must be very hard on your back. A lot of the crew sleep in hammocks. And unfortunately, we weren't allowed to go into the second hold all the way down. So I really don't know. I think it must be very claustrophobic. I think you have to be someone who can handle that kind of thing to go all the way down in there. But again, this is a ship that now takes a crew of 80 instead of 255. I cannot imagine
putting 255 people in there.
And, the kinds of details, there's like Pirates of the Caribbean. There are now, of course, chemical toilets on the ship. So I'm reading about it. It says, I'm thinking what did 255 men do before? It turns out that they used buckets on the deck.
Of course.
And then just dumped it out, basically, and whatever, So it's like, what a way to live. But who knows?
Yeah.
It was another time, right?
Yeah, it was fine.
And the crew is co-ed now, which it certainly would not have been 250 years ago.
Yeah.
But
nice.
My husband has the daughter of one of his cousins. She actually participated in the trip to the United States.
Wow.
Yeah. She's a great adventuress, and so she's been sailing on little ships or little boats all her life, and she participated as a volunteer to do that, which is kind of a trip to tell.
Yeah, that's great.
It's a cool thing to tell your grandchildren. Yeah.
That's great.
So there you are.
So this ship, you said you spent 3 hours because you probably looked at everything in the museum and everything else.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
But maybe you can see it in 2 hours.
Oh, sure.
Spend the other half a day looking around Rochefort.
Exactly.
Makes for a beautiful day.
It makes for a beautiful day. And honestly, if you can either come with a picnic or you can go and buy stuff that's nearby.
Right. Use one of the restaurants nearby.
There are restrooms there. There's the museum. If you just want to see the Hermione and go through that part, it's not very expensive. It's only €5 per person. If you want to see the Museum of the Marine plus the Corderie plus whatever else is there, it's a €15 ticket. Yeah. I think that they have family rates as well, for
right.
I think children under a certain age, I don't think you have to pay at all.
Yeah.
But it's really nice because the people who are walking around and working in the workshops and talking are young people. And so they're very vivacious. They're filled with energy. And really, even, I saw kids, maybe 10-year-olds, that age group, they're far little ones I don't think would be particularly, interested in what was going on. But they were interested. They were interested in seeing the cannons and seeing how it worked and seeing this and seeing that. And at one point, we had already finished our visit, and they were, okay, I don't remember now, I have to admit. They were either raising or lowering the sails. I can't remember which. So it was fun to watch, because everything is still operational. And you could get it out. So it's a very nice, it's a nice big location. Parking, there's a small parking lot just in front, which is really small, but then there are two big parking areas that are a walking distance away. Yeah. And so it's a lovely, lovely visit to do.
I look forward to going myself.
Ship ahoy.
Ships ahoy.
Ships ahoy.
Merci, Elyse.
You're welcome, Annie.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Again, I want to thank my patrons for supporting the show and giving back. Patrons get several exclusive rewards for doing that. You can see them at patreon.com/join us. Patreon, join us, no spaces or dashes. Thank you all for supporting the show. Some of you for a long time. You are wonderful. And a shout out this week to new patron, Julie M. Kernick. Thank you so much for becoming a patron, Julie, and for making this podcast possible. This week, I published a new coloring page of France for my patrons. This month, it's the Louvre and its beautiful pyramid, a fun thing to do with your kids or your grandkids. My thanks to Maris Rousseau and Louise Rudnicki, and also to Ning for sending in a one-time donation by using the green button on any page on Join Us in France that says, Tip Your Guide. You might be able to hear in my voice that I have a cold. It's the first cold for me since the pandemic started. I was pretty sure it wasn't COVID because I can still smell and taste, but since I'm going to Paris tomorrow, I decided I should do the right thing and take a test, and I'm happy to report that it's negative. It's just a cold, and a pretty mild cold at that. But I found out that contrary to what I believed, COVID tests are still free in France for those of us who are fully vaccinated. Only the unvaxxed and visitors need to pay for their tests. Do you think Macron wants all French people vaccinated? Yes, yes, indeed. And he's much reviled by his political opponents as a result. And the campaign for president is starting in France. But thankfully, he's a big boy. He can take it. For those of you who are planning to visit France soon, you probably know that we have a system of Passe Sanitaire in France, and that you needed to do certain things. For example, get on a plane, get in a train, enter a large museum. Some restaurants ask for it. Not everywhere anymore, but you know, you need it. And French people have it when they get vaccinated or when they get tested. We have an app called Tous Anti-Covid, and the certificate gets imported into Tous Anti. Now, for foreigners who have been allowed to come visit France since early June 2021, whereas French people and Europeans in general are just barely now, today or yesterday, allowed to visit the US. So it took a long time for the US to put anything in place. Anyway, for Americans who can come to France, there were different ways for them to get the health pass. And things changed and whatever. It changed again about 10 days ago. And now you need to apply for a vaccine equivalency health pass is what they call it. I will put, there's a procedure. I will put a link in the show notes for those of you who want to go through that. And for now, it's only certain pharmacies that can do this equivalency. The number of pharmacy keeps on increasing. When I told you last week, there were about 100. By now, there's well over 1,000 pharmacies who can do this. So I hope that eventually all pharmacies in France will be able to do this. But for now, you know, but the numbers increase rapidly. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. As I record this, there are 3 pharmacies within the airport, the CDG airport, the Charles de Gaulle airport, where most of you land, where you can do this test. So this is great because if you have a connecting flight or a connecting train, you can still get your health pass. Now, if you have a really tight connection, well, shame on you. You shouldn't take a tight connection and you're going to miss it. But if you have a nice long 3-4 hour connection, like I always recommend, then you'll be able to stop by a pharmacy. So I can tell you where these pharmacies are. They are in 2D, 2E, and 2F. I will send an email about all of this to my newsletter subscribers, giving you the details with the addresses and the names of these pharmacies and everything. But there are at least 3 right now and one just outside of the airport as well. So it's not that difficult to find a pharmacy to do that if you have a connecting flight, so long as you have enough time. And also, I wouldn't worry about it if you're not coming soon, because like I mentioned, we have a presidential election next year in April. And I would bet that if Emmanuel Macron can do whatever to get rid of the health pass between now and the election, he will do it. It's a high priority because there are a lot of people who are very upset about needing to show a health pass at all, ever. So, you know, which I can understand, obviously. But if you're coming next year, it's possible this won't be an issue at all. So just take a deep breath and just realize that it will work out one way or the other. I also got my seasonal flu shot and found out that I'll be able to do my COVID booster by the end of the month. It's all good. My pharmacy, I live in a village, as you know, and my pharmacy, they decided to just do the seasonal flu shots for this month because there's just one pharmacist who can do the shots. And so they'll get back to doing COVID boosters and such in a few days. I saw a really interesting documentary last night. It's called The Women and the Murderer, and it's on Netflix. It is a story about one of the worst serial killers in France, and I usually don't watch anything about serial killers. I find it creepy and awful. But I heard this woman, she wrote a book about this case, and she also made the documentary, and I heard her on French radio, and she was just fascinating. And I really love how she made this documentary because it places the victims, the families, the police at the center of the story. The crimes are shown, but it's like sketches. We see sketches of the murder scene and stuff. There's no blood and gore, and the murderer is almost secondary. I mean, you can see his face, but it's not like they keep, on American documentaries about crime, they keep bringing back the face of the killer or whatever. And they don't do that in this documentary. I thought it was really well done. And anyway, I recommend it. Again, it's called The Women and the Murderer. And it's available on Netflix in the US, in England, and Australia as well. I checked with the Join Us in France closed group on Facebook, and they told me that they could also see it. All right, let's do the French expression of the week. Should you say, je vous souhaite une bonne journée, or je vous souhaite une belle journée? So I wish you a good day, or I wish you a beautiful day. The French language may seem immutable with our Académie Française and all, but it's not. I've heard people wish each other une belle journée in the last few years, and I always thought that it was a bit odd. And as a matter of fact, I heard again on French radio that the first time they can find une belle journée, je vous souhaite une belle journée, was in 2008. So it's not very old. Pay attention next time you're in France. I bet you will hear someone say to you, passez une belle journée, instead of passez une bonne journée. I'm not talking about those days when, you giddily walk the streets of Paris and explain to yourself, quelle belle journée, because that was, that's totally normal. That was always totally normal. But wishing someone else a good day was not, it was not big in France when I was growing up. I mean, we say bonjour, which means good day. But in the 70s, when I was growing up, you didn't hear French people ending a conversation with passez une bonne journée. We would say au revoir or à la prochaine. I left France to live in the UK and the US for 18 years. And when I came back in 2005, I started to hear passer une bonne journée, which is a lovely sentiment. And I had gotten used to it because in America, they say have a nice day all the time. So it didn't seem strange to me. But recently, when they changed it to passer une belle journée, I thought, wishing a good day isn't enough anymore. It has to be a beautiful day. Now, there is nothing right or wrong about either one. You can say bonne journée, belle journée, whatever you prefer. But I bet you had not heard this before. And now that I've told you about it, I bet you'll hear it. So let me tell you just a little bit about what's going on with COVID in France. Emmanuel Macron, the president, is set to address the nation tonight, on Tuesday night, on the 9th of November. Obviously, I don't know what he's going to say, but I'm assuming that it's going to be something to do with trying to push more people to get vaccinated, especially people 65 and up who have been able to get a booster for several maybe 2-3 weeks already, and not a lot of them have decided to do that. So I think he's going to do what he can to kind of force their hand a little bit because they are the population most at risk from this. And so there is an uptick in cases, but it's mostly, as always, people who are not vaccinated who are ending up in the hospital and very, very sick. Children still cannot get vaccinated in France at this time. I know it's started in the US, but that hasn't started in France yet. But of course, children, while they're not at no risk, they're not at high risk, let's put it that way. So maybe the priority should continue to be on vaccinating the older people first. Anyway, we'll see what Macron has to say. There is definitely what looks like the start of another wave of COVID in France. For now, it's not scary, but they're keeping an eye on it. Show notes for this episode are on joinusinfrance.com/363, where you can see a recap of what we discussed with Elyse, as well as links to relevant resources and Elyse's most excellent notes. And if you enjoy the show, introduce a friend to the podcast and tell them why you listen. You are my only advertisers. And seeing that I'm not so good at social media, yeah, you really are it for me. You're my only hope, folks. Next week on the podcast, an episode with Heidi Hunter about her month in France on a budget. She did, it wasn't totally a budget trip, but she did a lot to save some money, and she was very smart about this. So I look forward to sharing that episode with you. Send questions or feedback to Annie@joinusinfrance.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you join me next time so we can look around France together. Au revoir. The Join Us in France travel podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2021 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.